The history of removed items has always fascinated me throughout my 11 years of playing the game. My second most popular series on the channel is Removed Abilities, and presently I believe the pilot episode holds the record for the highest use on Vars 1. While I can understand why they perform so well, that bit of nostalgia for how things used to be, the reason I think items are more interesting is due to the scope of impact they had across the game, sometimes being meta-defining and also on account of the fact that they sometimes make a return to the game in some way, shape, or form. For example, Crown of the Shattered Queen turned into Celestial Opposition. I thoroughly enjoyed making the episode on mythic items, so I figured let's make a part 3 to talk about a mixture of some more niche ones alongside a number of bigger changes. Without further ado, I welcome you to another episode of Removed Items. Before we get into the video though, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor for today. Exolag is working with my channel once again. You may have heard of it before, but for those unaware, Exolag is a software designed to reduce ping and latency, mitigate the risk of disconnections during online games, and even give you a small boost to your performance. It's currently available in over 190 countries with upwards of 1,200 servers across 5 continents. Exolag makes use of exclusive patented technology like multipath to enhance and streamline your connection, with the ability to be left on automatic mode, or if you want to tinker around with the settings of it, you can. The tool even offers professional support for advanced settings. Once everything is considered, the end result should be a noticeable drop in latency and an increase to your frame rate. If you use my QR code on screen or link in the description below, you can get a special offer for 50% off 1 full year through annual subscription. If you have issues pertaining to lag or FPS, I recommend taking a look at Exolag. It might be just what you need to fix that. Thanks again to Exolag for sponsoring the video, but for now, let's get back on topic. The first and most prominent item I want to go over is Duskblade of Draktharr, one of the few items in the game that I went out of my way to make an entire video piece on. If you have a longer lunch break today, I recommend you check it out. To briefly recap on the whole thing, Duskblade in particular was notable for going through some of the most iterations of any item in the game, or if I'm not mistaken, it currently holds the record for the highest number of variants on a single item with the same name. When it first came out way back in 6.3, it was a movement speed item whose passive made it so damaging a champion would cause them to take a sizable chunk of missing health damage after a delay, intended to be an execute of sorts. You might notice a similarity between Nightfall and the item passive on Storm Surge, and if you remember when Storm Surge first came out in Season 14, the item had to get nerfed several times over to mitigate the sheer burst damage it had. Back to Duskblade though, the second version of the item came out later that same year in 6.22, with a new passive to where after being out of vision of the enemy team, your next basic attack would do bonus true damage. To facilitate that, secondarily, it would also occasionally act as a temporary oracle lens, disabling nearby enemy wards to make it easier for you to get more procs of that true damage auto. 7.14 would see another iteration where it lost the movement speed passive and instead became a CDR item, with the item passive going from true damage to physical and being based on a flat scaling amount, while now slowing enemies by 99% for a quarter second. If that sounds familiar, Voltaic Cyclosword had an identical slowing effect up until just recently. Despite being only a quarter second, it was helpful in momentarily stopping enemy targets to virtually guarantee a vital skill shot like a Zed Shuriken or Rengar Bullet Strike. Additionally, speaking of Cyclosword, the new version we just got is reminiscent of the bonus damage part of Duskblade. In that regard, I guess you can call Cyclosword the spiritual successor to Duskblade. That's not the end of it though. During Preseason 11, Duskblade was granted a new property to its passive wherein scoring takedowns on an enemy champion would make you completely invisible for 1.5 seconds. The same invisibility present on the likes of Akali, Kha'Zix, and Shaco, where not even control wards can reveal them. An extremely cancerous iteration of Duskblade, and I believe it was also the first one to be occasionally picked up by non-assassins. But of course, it made assassins even more of a problem to go up against. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse though, the final version of Duskblade would forego the empowered auto attack altogether and instead increase all of your ability damage against enemies by up to 15% based on their missing health, capping at 20% health or less. That alone is significant, but more crucially, the stealth on takedown became untargetability and non-structure invincibility. While this one did have a cooldown of 10 seconds, so you couldn't just spam untargetability over and over with every kill, giving that momentary invulnerability for 1.5 seconds allowed many champions to reposition, buying time for cooldowns or other ancillary effects to kick in compared to before, where even if they were invisible, you could still kill them with AoE attacks or skill shots. Based on empirical data, not a single one of Duskblade's renditions didn't receive backlash of some kind. It either did too much damage on its own, or it made those who built it far too frustrating to deal with. Like most toxic items, it has since been made into an arena exclusive purchase where that kind of volatility is actually welcomed. Again, if you want to know more about the history of this item, I suggest you watch my dedicated video on it, one of the more controversial items in the game for sure. Okay, I think we spent enough time on one item, let's move on to another, and this is one that I think a lot of people want to have brought back in, Frost Queen's Claim, and then later Twin Shadows. During the 2010s, purchasable vision was more abundant. You could buy Sightstone on any champion, not just supports, or you could outright buy Vision Wards in addition to Pink Wards. There were also a couple Vision-centric items available as well, like Frost Queen's Claim. Frost Queen had a most unusual yet surprisingly useful item active. It would send out 2 ghosts that would go out and chase the nearest enemy champion it could find, whereby upon reaching them, it would grant vision of them and slow them for a duration. Originally the AP support item, it became Twin Shadows in 2018. Or should I say, technically Twin Shadows came out first and then became Frost Queen before turning back to Twin Shadows. I actually enjoyed this item a lot. It was a great way to scout for enemies when setting up for Baron or Dragon, as the ghosts will search within a very wide radius around you and auto-target them. Most of these vision-oriented items were taken away because Riot thought there was too much vision in the game. Which, if you think about it, sounds a bit contradictory when you consider they've added Scryer Bloom, Void Scuttlecrab, and the new Fadelights over the years. Now mind you, those are global additions that can be contested in and of themselves, but I do wish we could add this type of item back into the game, although that would somewhat make death brushing next to unviable. I honestly don't know why they took this item away, other than maybe that it was too niche of an item to warrant a purchase over pure DPS and combat utility. On the subject of niche though, Gargoyle Stoneplate was characterized by how eccentric of an item it was. Much like Duskblade, it's now an arena exclusive item, but when it first came out back in 7.9, trying to find a champion that wanted this item at the time was quite difficult. On release, it gave 40 armor and magic resist that would double if 3 or more enemy champions were nearby. Combining that with the item active granting you a massive max health and size increase at the cost of damage dealt, the purpose of Gargoyle was extremely apparent, to make the wearer capable of withstanding overwhelming amounts of burst damage in teamfights. Kind of a small issue though, all it really gave you was a mountain of stats, temporary stats at that. And if you recall, when it comes to tank items, each item specializes in a certain function to add more utility than just outright durability. Thornmail gives you a bit of DPS and grievous wounds, Randuin's mitigates crit damage, so on and so forth. Even though tanks aren't really known for their damage output, the fact that you turned into basically a giant meat shield made Gargoyle Stoneplate the embodiment of situational. It provided no health whatsoever, which is confusing given the item active potentially doubling your max health. Realistically, even champions who could benefit from that active, like Cho'Gath, didn't see much of a reason to build it consistently over conventional tank items. Later on in Season 11, it was made to give ability haste and the item active be a flat-out shield, kind of like a locket but for just yourself. This made the item more practical and consistent, but it was still ultimately a meat shield item. You might be wondering though, how is that any different from Jak'Shul, which does get purchased a fair amount? Glad you asked, because it gives health at base. The appeal of getting a massive shield was undermined by the fact that the item itself gave no HP, meaning even mega health scalers like Tahm Kench, Mundo, and Sion didn't really care to build this item, certainly not early on. Perhaps it would be a viable endgame purchase, but I mean, how often do tanks make it to full build to begin with? I get what they were attempting to accomplish. They wanted Gargoyle to be a super mega ultra tank item that could make you even more durable than you already are. But the circumstances where you could obtain that full efficiency were so few and far between, as opposed to Jak'Shul, which offers significantly better upfront value and consistency. Still though, on the rare occasion he built it, it was entertaining to see Cho'Gath do 2000 damage with his ultimate. Alright, for our next item, this is one that I'm extremely glad to not see in the game anymore, Frozen Mallet. For the uninitiated, Frozen Mallet is essentially the physical counterpart to Rylai's. It gave identical stats, only instead of ability power, it would be attack damage, and instead of abilities applying the slow, it was basic attacks. Why did this item get taken out of the game when Rylai's is still here? Being only on basic attacks, how could it be more offensive than Rylai's perma-slowing you on champions like Bran, Zyra, and such? Because ironically, auto-attackers abused it way more. When you think about it, there's no cooldown to basic attacks. Sure, some champions have no cooldown on Rylai's by virtue of their dot damage or rapid spell procs, but generally speaking, abilities have cooldowns, and Rylai's is inherently kept in check by the mage class's need for supplementary stats like mana and ability haste, not just HP and ability power. Frozen Mallet, on the other hand, was extremely frustrating to go up against because it made those who built it become simultaneously incredibly resilient thanks to the 700 bonus health, and it made them impossible to escape from. Suddenly, every single auto-attacker became Ashe. Ashe having Frost Shot is somewhat tolerable thanks to the champion herself being immobile, but give this to a Gnar, Yasuo, Teemo, Tryndamere, Vayne, Kog'Maw, and they can endlessly, relentlessly kite you or run you down. Sure, they wouldn't be dealing as much DPS compared to if they bought a full-on damage item, but they wouldn't have to. They could easily throw an extra auto attack or two since you couldn't run away from them, and they could live a lot longer thanks to that 700 HP. Frozen Mallet Yasuo was by far the most offensive example of this. In fact, they specifically changed his ultimate armor penetration to be off critical strikes only purely because of tank Yasuo being so overpowered. Gnar was insufferable in top lane. God save you if you were playing a Juggernaut against a Frozen Mallet Gnar. Case in point, basic attacks are simply far too accessible of an attack method to be granted perma slows, and no, there's no universe where this can come back in a constructive way. People already bitch about Rylai's being oppressive on those who built it, and you can imagine how much worse Frozen Mallet would be in the modern day with all the new champions we have. Frozen Mallet Yone, you can't dodge any of his abilities anymore, or imagine Bel'Veth, Zawhead, Briar, or Senna with this item. Literally unplayable. And before you say why not a Frozen Mallet that works off abilities the same way Rylai's does, absolutely not. The last thing we need is giving permaslows to Riven, Ambessa, and Garen. No thank you. Alrighty, we got room for I think 2 more, and this next one's a personal favorite of mine. Mainly because as someone who enjoys playing Dr. Mundo, I actually found ample use for it. Anathema's Chains. Anathema's Chains came out in tandem with Hullbreaker to make split pushing a more viable option. Only in the case of the former, it was built to give tanks a fighting chance against a split pusher where they would ordinarily be taken advantage of on account of their poor dueling potential. Anathemas gave health and ability haste, and the item active would allow you to select a member of the enemy team, causing that champion to deal 30% less damage against you and have 20% less tenacity. What may seem situational is actually surprisingly pragmatic of a purchase. It cost only 2500 gold, making it easy to buy, and though it gave no resistances, health stacking champions are more common than armor and MR stacking ones, plus the ability haste is nice. The most frequent example of where I think people would buy Anathemas is Dr. Mundo vs Darius. Mundo is already pretty solid against Darius by way of a strong neutral game, complete lack of armor making Darius' armor penetration pointless, and high HP making Noxie and Guillotine not that scary, plus the regen making it difficult for Darius to get Mundo low enough to actually finish him off. Anathema's Chains pushed that even further by causing Darius to do so little damage to Mundo that Mundo could heal faster than Darius could actually hurt him. Anathemas in general, while still relatively niche, was pretty effective on top Kench, Ornn, and Mundo whose health scaling or high percent health damage would allow them to put up a fight against split pushers while making them really bulky against them. Anecdotally, I found myself grabbing one if I had to deal with a Tryndamere or Jax, or if the enemy team had a super hyper carry ADC and no major threats besides them. That said, it was ultimately phased out for being situational and kind of stat checky in a degenerate way in those situations. I do think there's a place for an item like this, especially in top lane. Perhaps make it tied to crowd control or something instead of just point and click. For our last item, I actually don't remember if we talked about this in a different video, but in case I didn't, let's go way back to Season 1 and talk about Zhonya's Ring, one of the simplest items in the game, but if such an item were to exist in the present day, it would be by far the most toxic across League's entire inventory. Zhonya's Ring was a combination of 2 items, Rabadon's Death Cap and, continuous surprise, Zhonya's Hourglass. Carrying the same exact active that Zhonya's does, it also gave you the big chunk of AP from Death Cap along with the percent AP passive. Like it literally was as if you took Death Cap and gave it Zhonya's active. It doesn't take a genius to find out why Zhonya's Ring was expeditiously phased out of the game. Rabadon's Death Cap is seen as the pinnacle of offensive pressure for AP champions. What it lacked in utility, it made up for in sheer power, easily providing north of 250 to 300 AP in the mid to late game. Conversely, Zhonya's is the pinnacle of defensive utility for AP champions. Being able to essentially pause the game for yourself comes with an entire laundry list of potential benefits. You can use it to screw over a myriad of champions. Naturally, having both on a single item made it without question the single most slot efficient item in the entire game. Opportunity cost is often the deciding factor for buying or not buying a certain item. Calling back to Gargoyle Stoneplate and Anathema's Chains, it's not that they were bad items per se, more that you would much rather build something else. Zhonya's Ring was the opposite. It was so inventory space efficient that not a single ability powered champion on planet Earth would not want to build this item. You got the best offense and defense in a single purchase. Splitting them into 2 distinct items brought that opportunity cost in, where you'd have to allocate 2 item slots and significantly more gold if you wanted both the Hourglass and the Death Cap. That being said, it raises some interesting questions on what items would be cool to put together. Makes me wonder if we could do something like ZZ Rock Portal with Anathema's Chains to make it a more pragmatic anti-split pusher item for tanks. Anyway, that concludes episode 3 of Removed Items. Some more eclectic ones this time around, I'd say. Let me know your thoughts on the items I talked about in the comments down below, especially if you missed any of them and want to see them back. For the time being though, if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars and join my Discord server, and check out my other 2 episodes on removed items if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.